sorry. I was not prepared. It has been a while. I forgot all the things that I needed to do. Yeah. So we're back with Sherlock. I hope the, hang on. Let me, I haven't, I am very gesticulative, so I need to make sure that my webcam can show my gesticulations, but also not be too, I usually do this, right? Okay, so I could probably make this a little bit not there. Hang on. We're just gonna quick fix that just a little bit, and then we will get into the things. Whoa, that's, no, I can't, oops. This one. Like there. And like there-ish. Ha ha ha. I think I'm like also just generally slightly not, the camera's different than what it should be, so I don't know. We'll leave it there. I'll probably adjust one more time once we get the book up. Okay. Sorry. Hello! I'm sorry. When you type it like that, I have to do something with it. I'm sorry for however that came off. But I hope you're well. I hope you're well. I will check the things. I'm so sorry. Yes, okay. Ah, the music. I forgot about the music. I love the music. It is Conte Fantastique. Based on Edgar Allan Poe's The Masque of the Red Death, which was a fun one to read as well. So that looks good. That looks good. I think. I hope. And we will get into the readings. I am very much excited. Yes. Okay. So I have. For anyone who does not know, I started this. I started streaming in order to read with people, and we started reading Sherlock. I almost want to say it was last fall, and then once this new year started, I can't remember. I think we finished what we did. Hang on, here we go. Let me. Forgot how to switch this. Oh god. This. Nope. I'm so sorry. It's got its whole different thing there. Whenever I don't do one of the types of streams for a while, I completely forget all the things that go into it. I apologize. There. So what we did is at the beginning of the new year, we finished The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So now we are on to The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. And we stopped because I was getting into check ride mode. So that, yeah, I had to start focusing on that, and I didn't want to... oh, I had to do one more thing. Hang on. Yeah, I wanted to focus on that, and since then we haven't gotten back into it. But now we're back into it, hopefully. So here we go. One of the things is there were some illustrations for this one that I had wanted to do with this. They don't show up in this version. So I am going to swap to another version at one point. I will try to make sure that it is not any issue, but we'll see what happens. So yes, The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. Number 1 being Silver Blaze. And as I was researching, this one was called The Adventure of Silver Blaze. So I don't know why that is. There was a movie made about it, so maybe it was the movie. I'm not sure. Anyway, The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. Silver Blaze. Sorry. I'm excited, can you tell? We're back. So is Sherlock. Silver Blaze. I am afraid, Watson, that I shall have to go, said Holmes, as we sat down together to our breakfast one morning. Go? Where to? To Dartmoor, to King's Pyland. Been a while. It has been a while. Are you talking about Sherlock? Because you've been around, making silly things in the Discord. Tisk tisk, that was hilarious. I didn't think about that as a commercial pilot. Holding out. You regret nothing. I know, you shouldn't. It was amazing. Oh, my instructor told me a really good joke today that I can't share on stream. I'll have to figure out because it's amazing. Anyway, sorry. Sherlock has to go to Dartmoor, to King's Pyland. I was not surprised. Indeed, my only wonder was that he had not already been mixed upon this extraordinary case, which was the one topic of conversation through the length and breadth of England. For a whole day my companion had rambled about the room with his chin upon his chest and his brows knitted, charging and recharging his pipe with the strongest black tobacco, and absolutely deaf to any of my questions or remarks. Fresh editions of every paper had been sent up by our news agent, only to be glanced over and tossed down into a corner. Yet, silent as he was, I knew perfectly well what it was over which he... Oh my God! Yet, silent as he was, I knew perfectly well what it was over which he was brooding. Sorry, that was a strange sentence. There was but one problem before the public which could challenge his powers of analysis, and that was the singular disappearance of the favorite for the Wessex Cup, and the tragic murder of its trainer. When, therefore, he suddenly announced his intention of setting out for the scene of the drama, it was only what I had both expected and hoped for. I should be most happy to go down with you, if I should not be in the way, said I. Damn it, after streaming, you'll catch it in the morning. Was gonna send me something anyways? Okay. But I'm almost like, but then there's a record that I share such things. You know what I mean? So it must keep it secret. Keep it safe. It's so good. Yes. I don't know. Maybe if I say it like really quietly and like in the middle of the stream, then maybe it wouldn't be such an issue. So maybe once you have to go to sleep, maybe I will share it really quietly. Must be a very scandalous joke. It's a little bit of a scandalous joke. It has something behind it. There was a reason behind it. Don't take that. I will explain. I'll explain at some point. Okay. My dear Watson, you would confer a great favor upon me by coming, and I think that your time will not be misspent, for there are points about the case which promise to make it an absolutely unique one. We have, I think, just time to catch our train at Paddington, and I will go further into the matter upon our journey. You would oblige me by bringing with you your very excellent field glass. And so it happened that an hour or so later, I found myself in the corner of a first-class carriage, flying along en route for Exeter, while Sherlock Holmes, with his sharp, eager face, framed in his ear-flapped traveling cap, dipped rapidly into the bundle of fresh papers which he had procured at Paddington. We had left Reading far behind us before he thrust the last one of them under the seat and offered me his cigar case. Yes, of course. No. Once you let me know that you're going to go to sleep, then I will share it quietly before you leave. No, I would never do such a thing to you. I'm also curious what you were going to send me. Very curious. We are going well, said he, looking out the window and glancing at his watch. Our rate at present is 53.5 miles an hour. I have not observed the quarter-mile posts, said I. Nor have I, but the telegraph posts upon this line are 60 yards apart, and the calculation is a simple one. I presume that you have looked into this matter of the murder of John Straker and the disappearance of Silver Blaze. I have seen what the Telegraph and the Chronicle have to say. You were going to discuss some literature you have procured? Yes, I am very excited. I am looking forward to it. Yes, definitely send it to me. And I've just remembered what I've fully remembered what the joke is, and no, I probably won't say it on the stream now that I think about it. Yeah. It is. It's good. It's funny. It's definitely a cockpit joke. So yeah, I probably shouldn't have even brought it up. I'm sorry. It is one of those cases where the art of the reasoner should be used rather for the sifting of details than for than for the acquiring of fresh evidence. The tragedy has been so uncommon, so complete, and of such personal importance to so many people that we are suffering from a plethora of surmise, conjecture, and hypothesis. The difficulty is to detach the framework of fact, of absolute undeniable fact, from the embellishments of theorists and reporters. Then, having established ourselves upon this sound basis, it is our duty to see what inferences may be drawn and what are the special points upon which the whole mystery turns. On Tuesday evening, I received telegrams from both Colonel Ross, the owner of the horse, and from Inspector. Oh, sorry. On Tuesday evening, I received telegrams from both Colonel Ross, the owner of the horse, and from Inspector Gregory, who is looking after the case, inviting my cooperation. Tuesday evening, I exclaimed, and this is Thursday morning. Why didn't you go down yesterday? Because I made a blunder, my dear Watson, which is, I am afraid, a more common occurrence than any one would think who only knew me through your memoirs. The fact is that I could not believe it possible that the most remarkable horse in England could long remain concealed, especially in so sparsely inhabited a place as the north of Dartmoor. From hour to hour yesterday, I expected to hear that he had been found, and that his abductor was the murderer of John Straker. When, however, another morning had come, and I found that beyond the arrest of young Fitzroy Simpson nothing had been done, I felt that it was time for me to take action. Yet in some ways I feel that yesterday has not been wasted. You have formed a theory, then? At least I have got a grip of the essential facts of the case. I shall enumerate them to you, for nothing clears up a case so much as stating it to another person, and I can hardly expect your cooperation if I do not show you the position from which we start. I lay back against the cushions, puffing at my cigar, while Holmes, leaning forward with his long, thin forefinger checking off the points upon the palm of his left hand, gave me a sketch of the events which had led to our journey. Silver Blaze, said he, is from the Somami stock and holds as brilliant a record as his famous ancestor. Oh, so that must be the horse specifically. Okay. He is now in his 5th year and has brought in turn each of the prizes of the turf to Colonel Ross, his fortunate owner. Up to the time of the catastrophe, he was the first favorite for the Wessex Cup, the betting being 3-1 on him. He has always, however, been a prime favorite with the racing public, and has never yet disappointed them, so that even at those odds, enormous sums of money have been laid upon him. It is obvious, therefore, that there were many people who have the strongest interest in preventing Silver Blaze from being there at the fall of the flag next Tuesday. The fact was, of course, appreciated at King's Pyland, where the Colonel's training stable is situated. Every precaution was taken to guard the favorite. The trainer, John Straker, is a retired jockey who rode in Colonel Ross's colors before he became too heavy for the weighing chair. He has served the Colonel for 5 years as jockey and for 7 as trainer, and has always shown himself to be a zealous and honest servant. Under him were 3 lads, for the establishment was a small one, containing only 4 horses in all. One of these lads sat up each night in the stable, while the others slept in the loft. All 3 bore excellent characters. John Straker, who is a married man, lived in a small villa about 200 yards from the stables. He has no children, keeps 1 maidservant, and is comfortably off. The country round is very lonely, but about half a mile to the north there is a small cluster of villas which have been built by a Tavistock contractor for the use of invalids and others who may wish to enjoy the pure Dartmoor air. Tavistock itself lies 2 miles to the west, while across the moor, also about 2 miles distant, is the larger training establishment of Mapleton, which belongs to Lord Backwater, and is managed by Silas Brown. In every other direction, the moor is a complete wilderness, inhabited only by a few roaming gypsies. Such was the general situation last Monday night, when the catastrophe occurred. On that evening, the horses had been exercised and watered as usual, and the stables were locked up at 9 o'clock. 2 of the lads walked up to the trainer's house, where they had supper in the kitchen, while the third, Ned Hunter, remained on guard. At a few minutes after 9, the maid, Edith Baxter, carried down to the stables his supper, which consisted of a dish of curried mutton. She took no liquid, as there was a water tap in the stables, and it was the rule that the lad on duty should drink nothing else. The maid carried a lantern with her, as it was very dark and the path ran across the open moor. Edith Baxter was within 30 yards of the stables when a man appeared out of the darkness and called to her to stop. As he stepped into the circle of yellow light thrown by the lantern, she saw that he was a person of gentlemanly bearing, dressed in a gray suit of tweeds with a cloth cap. He wore gaiters and carried a heavy stick with a knob to it. She was most impressed, however, by the extreme pallor of his face and by the nervousness of his manner. His age, she thought, would be rather over 30 than under it. "Can you tell me where I am?" he asked. "I had almost made up my mind to sleep on the moor when I saw the light of your lantern." "You are close to the King's Pyland training stables," said she. "Oh, indeed. What a stroke of luck," he cried. "I understand that a stable boy sleeps there alone every night. Perhaps that is his supper which you are carrying to him. Now, I am sure that you would not be too proud to earn the price of a new dress, would you?" He took a piece of white paper folded up out of his waistcoat pocket. "See that the boy has this tonight, and you shall have the prettiest frock that money can buy." She was frightened by the earnestness of his manner, and ran past him to the window through which she was accustomed to hand the meals. It was already opened, and Hunter was seated at the small table inside. She had begun to tell him of what had happened, when the stranger came up again. "Good evening," said he, looking through the window. "I wanted to have a word with you." The girl had sworn that as he spoke, she noticed the corner of the little paper packet protruding from his closed hand. "What business have you here?" asked the lad. "It's business that may put something into your pocket," said the other. "You've 2 horses in for the Wessex Cup, Silver Blaze and Bayard. Let me have the straight tip, and you won't be a loser. Is it a fact that at the weights, Bayard could give the other 100 yards in 5 furlongs, and that the stable have put their money on him?" "So you're one of those damned touts," cried the lad. "I'll show you how we serve them in King's Pyland." He sprang up and rushed across the stable to unloose the dog. The girl fled away to the house, but as she ran, she looked back and saw that the stranger was leaning through the window. A minute later, however, when Hunter rushed out with the hound, he was gone, and though he ran all round the buildings, he failed to find any trace of him. "Hello, how's it going? Good to see you. Hope you're well. We are reading Silver Blaze. There was a stolen racehorse. Yes, by the name of Silver Blaze." I'm really good at describing things. "One moment," I asked. "Did the stable boy, when he ran out with the dog, leave the door unlocked behind him?" "Excellent, Watson, excellent," murmured my companion. "The importance of the point struck me so forcibly that I sent a special wire to Dartmoor yesterday to clear the matter up. The boy locked the door before he left it. The window, I may add, was not large enough for a man to get through." Hunter waited until his fellow grooms had returned, when he sent a message to the trainer and told him what had occurred. Straker was excited at hearing the account, although he does not seem to have quite realized its true significance. It left him, however, vaguely uneasy, and Mrs. Straker, waking at 1 in the morning, found that he was dressing. In reply to her inquiries, he said that he could not sleep on account of his anxiety about the horses, and that he intended to walk down to the stables to see that all was well. She begged him to remain at home, as she could hear the rain pattering against the window, but in spite of her entreaties, he pulled on his large mackintosh and left the house. "Good, excellent. I'm glad you're well, and I'm also well. I have flying story, probably near the end or maybe in the middle. But yeah, so it was an interesting day. So yeah. And we're reading again, so I'm really happy about that. I need fiction in my life. I did, yes, just the Macintosh left the house. Okay. Mrs. Straker awoke at 7 in the morning to find that her husband had not yet returned. She dressed herself hastily, called the maid, and set off for the stables. The door was open. Inside, huddled together upon a chair, Hunter was sunk in a state of absolute stupor. The favorite stall was empty, and there were no signs of his trainer. The 2 lads who slept in the chaff-cutting loft above the harness room were quickly aroused. They had heard nothing during the night, for they are both sound sleepers. Hunter was obviously under the influence of some powerful drug, and as no sense could be got out of him, he was left to sleep it off while the two lads and the two women ran out in search of the absentees. They still had hopes that the trainer had for some reason taken out the horse for early exercise, but on ascending the knoll near the house, from which all the neighboring moors were visible, they not only could see no signs of the missing favorite, but they perceived something which warned them that they were in the presence of a tragedy. You need to finish reading Apollo 13? How far did you get? And when did you stop? Because yes, you do, definitely. Start not quite now, but after. But after, yes. Or whenever you get a chance, I guess. About a quarter of a mile from the stables, John Straker's overcoat was flapping from a furze bush. Immediately beyond, there was a bowl-shaped depression in the moor, and at the bottom of this was found the dead body of the unfortunate trainer. His head had been shattered by a savage blow from some heavy weapon, and he was wounded on the thigh, where there was a long, clean cut, inflicted evidently by some very sharp instrument. It was clear, however, that Straker had defended himself vigorously against his assailants, for in his right hand he held a small knife, which was clotted with blood up to the handle, while in his left he clasped a red and black silk cravat, which was recognized by the maid as having been worn on the preceding evening by the stranger who had visited the stables. Hunter, on recovering from his stupor, was also quite positive as to the ownership of the cravat. He was equally certain that the same stranger had, while standing at the window, drugged his curried mutton and so deprived the stables of their watchman. Oh, gosh darn it! As to the missing horse, there were abundant proofs in the mud which lay at the bottom of the fatal hollow that he had been there at the time of the struggle. But from that morning he has disappeared, and although a large reward has been offered and all the gypsies of Dartmoor are on the alert, no news has come of him. Finally, an analysis has shown that the remains of his supper left by the stable lad contain an appreciable quantity of powdered opium, while the people at the house partook of the same dish on the same night without any ill effect. Those are the main facts of the case, stripped of all surmise and stated as baldly as possible. I shall now recapitulate what the police have done in the matter. Probably 2/3 of the way through. Ooh, nice. So it's not too far to go. I guess depending on how long it is. I don't know that off the top of my head. There have been a couple books in my life that I've had to go back to, but I think in recent years it's like I can't not finish a book. So yeah, it's become a habit, a good but also sometimes maybe not such a bad habit, or not such a good habit, because sometimes I have to read it too much, and then I'm doing that instead of other things. When you were at the NASA tent, it made for some interesting conversations. Yes, stories. But yeah, definitely. Very cool. Well, I hope you get a chance to finish it at some point. I know you're busy. So yeah, that would be good. So now what the police are doing or have done in the one day. What, is it just the one day? Because he heard about it on the Tuesday evening. Yeah, so that must have been of that day. So, let's hear. Inspector Gregory, to whom the case has been committed... Sorry, the mic is strange. Inspector Gregory, to whom the case has been committed, is an extremely competent officer. Were he but gifted with imagination, he might rise to great heights in his profession. On his arrival, he promptly found and arrested the man upon whom suspicion naturally rested. There was little difficulty in finding him, for he inhabited one of those villas which I have mentioned. His name, it appears, was Fitzroy Simpson. He was a man of excellent birth and education, who had squandered a fortune upon the turf, and who lived now by doing a little quiet and genteel bookmaking in the sporting clubs of London. An examination of his betting book shows that bets to the amount of £5,000 had been registered by him against the favourite. On being arrested, he volunteered that statement that he had come down to Dartmoor in the hope of getting some information about the King's Pyland horses, and also about Desborough, the second favorite, which was in charge of Silas Brown at the which was in charge of Silas Brown at the Mapleton stables. He did not attempt to deny that he had acted as described upon the evening before, but declared that he had no sinister designs and had simply wished to obtain first-hand information. When confronted with his cravat, he turned very pale and was utterly unable to account for its presence in the hand of the murdered man. His wet clothing showed that he had been out in the storm of the night before, and his stick, which was a penning lawyer weighted with lead, was just such a weapon as might, by repeated blows, have inflicted the terrible injuries to which the trainer had succumbed. On the other hand, there was no wound upon his person, while the state of Straker's knife would show that one at least of his assailants must bear his mark upon him. There you have it all in a nutshell, Watson, and if you can give me any light, I shall be infinitely obliged to you. I had listened with the greatest interest to the statement which Holmes, with characteristic clearness, had laid before me. Though most of the facts were familiar to me, I had not sufficiently appreciated their relative importance, nor their connection to each other. Hello, how's it going? We're reading, I'm very excited, Silver Blaze, a missing racehorse, or potentially stolen racehorse, and a murdered man, the trainer. So, there, you're all caught up. One lady we're talking with personally met some of the astronauts, so it was neat hearing about them. Definitely. Oh, very cool. So, okay. I'm not sure I ever went to the NASA tent. So how is that set up, and who's all there, and what's all in it? I'm curious. Very cool. That's awesome. I think last year we met, Eileen Collins. So, yeah. But I don't think that was in the NASA tent. So, yeah, I would be curious about how that one's actually set up. Infinitely obliged. Okay, so now it's Watson's turn. I had listened with the greatest interest to the statement which Holmes, with characteristic clearness, had laid before me. Though most of the facts were familiar to me, I had not sufficiently appreciated their relative importance, nor their connection to each other. Is it not possible, I suggested, that the incised wound upon Straker may have been caused by his own knife in the convulsive struggles which follow any brain injury? It is more than possible. It is probable, said Holmes. In that case, one of the main points in favor of the accused disappears. And yet, said I, even now I fail to understand what the theory of the police can be. Must have been an intense situation. You'll see yourself out. No, you must stop and not stop. You must stop leaving and stay to make more of those comments, because they're amazing. Absolutely puntastic. I am afraid that whatever theory we state has very grave objections to it, returned my companion. The police imagine, I take it, that this Fitzroy Simpson, having drugged the lad, and having in some way obtained a duplicate key, opened the stable door and took out the horse, with the intention, apparently, of kidnapping him altogether. His bridle is missing, so that Simpson must have put this on. Then, having left the door open behind him, he was leading the horse away over the moor, when he was either met or overtaken by the trainer. A row naturally ensued. Simpson beat out the trainer's brains with his heavy stick without receiving any injury from the small knife, which Straker used in self-defense, and then the thief either led the horse on to some secret hiding place, or else it may have bolted during the struggle and be now wandering out on the moors. That is the case as it appears to the police, and improbable as it is, all other explanations are more improbable still. However, I shall very quickly test the matter when I am once upon the spot, and until then I cannot really see how we can get much further than our present position. It was evening before we reached the little town of Tavistock, which lies, like the boss of a shield, in the middle of the huge circle of Dartmoor. Two gentlemen were awaiting us in the station. The one, a tall, fair man with lion-like hair and beard and curiously penetrating light blue eyes. The other, a small, alert person, very neat and dapper, in a frock coat and gaiters, with trim little side whiskers and an eyeglass. The latter was Colonel Ross, the well-known sportsman. The other, Inspector Gregory, a man who was rapidly making his name in the English detective service. "I am delighted that you have come down, Mr. Holmes," said the colonel. "The inspector here has done all that could possibly be suggested, but I wish to leave no stone unturned in trying to avenge poor Straker and in recovering my horse." "Have there been any fresh developments?" asked Holmes. "I am sorry to say that we have made very little progress," said the inspector. "We have an open carriage outside, and as you would no doubt like to see the place before the light fails, we might talk it over as we drive." A minute later, we were all seated in a comfortable landau, pretty sure it's landau, and were rattling through the quaint old Devonshire, like Gloucestershire, Devonshire city. Inspector Gregory was full of his case and poured out a stream of remarks, while Holmes threw in an occasional question or interjection. Colonel Ross leaned back with his arms folded and his hat tilted over his eyes, while I listened with interest to the dialogue of the two detectives. Gregory was formulating his theory, which was almost exactly what Holmes had foretold in the train. "They have a lot of stuff set up inside. Some stuff for kids, nice, and some things more technical, with the engineers who worked on the projects right there to talk about it. Also, it has AC. Oh. That's up there with one of the best parts, I would think. Very cool. Oh, awesome. And that's on the ground specifically, right? Because I know there's the kid station, the kid venture out by the museum / that other hangar. But yeah, that's what area, like what section is. But yeah, that would be a really interesting thing to go to and to talk to people about. Did you plan? Do you usually go there? Did you plan to go there specifically? In the gateway to aviation area. I didn't fully get my whole get the whole understanding of the grounds last year, and it's been an entire year. So yes. Is what direction? That might help me. I appreciate you. "The net is drawn pretty close round Fitzroy Simpson," he remarked, "and I believe myself that he is our man. At the same time, I recognize that the evidence is purely circumstantial and that some new development may upset it. How about Straker's knife? We have quite come to the conclusion that he wounded himself in his fall. My friend Dr. Watson made that suggestion to me as we came down. If so, it would tell against this man, Simpson." You usually walk through it to look at things. Okay, that's absolutely, yeah. I'm sure. I assume they have different things something new every year. That's super cool. Walk through the main gate and head northeast, and it will be in an area on the left side. Okay, all right, sounds good. I think I have my bearings then. Nice. Okay. Very cool. You have the hiccups. I have a cure if you would like to try. Okay, so you have to pretend that there's something very white and very fluffy, a little fluffy ball in your hands. Okay, it's filling up your hands. It's very fluffy. And you really got to imagine it. It's right there. Okay, are you ready? All right, and now you have to swallow it. Oh, you gotta feel it. You gotta feel it in your mouth. It's all furry. It's weird, but it works. And then you gotta swallow it. And then you gotta feel it going down as you swallow. It's all furry, and it's going, and it goes down. And then you gotta let me know whether you have the hiccups or not. This year you actually stopped and talked to the NASA people. Nice. And so they're like at their sorts of stations, or are there some people like kind of sitting at tables? Like, do they do signings and stuff like that as well? Nice. One lady was in charge of one of The NASA libraries. Ugh. That's awesome. Oh, that's so cool. Next year for sure. Undoubtedly, he has neither a knife nor any sign of a wound. The evidence against him is certainly very strong. He had a great interest in the disappearance of the favorite. He lies under suspicion of having poisoned the stable boy. He was undoubtedly out in the storm. He was armed with a heavy stick, and his cravat was found in the dead man's hand. I really think we have enough to go before a jury. Holmes shook his head. A clever counsel would tear it all to rags, said he. Why should he take the horse out of the stable? If he wished to injure it, why could he not do it there? Has a duplicate key been found in his possession? What chemist sold him the powdered opium? Above all, where could he, a stranger to the district, hide a horse, and such a horse as this? What is his own explanation as to the paper which he wished the maid to give to the stable boy? You think it worked? See? Works every time. Another one, you forget her exact title, but she was in charge of something in the Artemis program. That's so cool. I assume NASA has always kind of gone like sort of hand in hand with AirVenture. Has it like kind of come into it more recently, or just kind of still the same? It does. It goes hand in hand. It does. He says that it was a 10-pound note. One was found in his purse. But your other difficulties are not so formidable as they seem. He is not a stranger to the district. He has twice lodged at Tavistock in the summer. The opium was probably brought from London. The key, having served its purpose, would be hurled away. The horse may be at the bottom of one of the pits or old mines upon the moor. What does he say about the cravat? He acknowledges that it is his, and declares that he had lost it. But a new element has been introduced into the case, which may account for his leading the horse from the stable. Holmes pricked up his ears. We have found traces which show that a party of gypsies encamped on Monday night within a mile of the spot where the murder took place. On Tuesday, they were gone. Now, presuming that there was some understanding between Simpson and these gypsies, might he not have been leading the horse to them when he was overtaken, and may they not have him now? It is certainly possible. The moor is being scoured for these gypsies. I have also examined every stable and outhouse in Tavistock, and for a radius of 10 miles. There is another training stable quite close, I understand. Yes, and that is a factor which we must certainly not neglect. As Desborough, their horse, was second in the betting, they had an interest in the disappearance of the favorite. Silas Brown, the trainer, is known to have had large bets upon the event, and he was no friend to poor Straker. We have, however, examined the stables, and there is nothing to connect him with the affair. And nothing to connect this man Simpson with the interests of the Mapleton stables. Nothing at all. No, it didn't. They came back. Gosh darn it. Try it again, and you have to do it perfectly. And you got to imagine it, and it's got to be, yeah, you got to imagine it and do it very slowly. Do it very slowly and feel every single inch. Don't take that out of context. Still the same? Okay, you haven't really visited their tent until the last few years. Okay, sounds good. Interesting. Okay. I mean, it is. Like, it's... I don't know. I think it's an interesting thing just because it's like... It's usually about, like, planes and stuff, like, in just, like, the air. But then, yeah, NASA, space. So, it's planes, but higher. So, yeah, I guess. It does make sense. Holmes leaned back in the carriage, and the conversation ceased. A few minutes later, our driver pulled up at a neat little red brick villa with overhanging eaves which stood by the road. Some distance off, across a paddock, lay a long gray-tiled outbuilding. In every other direction, the low curves of the moor, bronze-colored from the fading ferns, stretched away to the skyline, broken only by the steeples of Tavistock, and by a cluster of houses away to the westward, which marked the Mapleton stables. We all sprang out with the exception of Holmes, who continued to lean back with his eyes fixed upon the sky in front of him, entirely absorbed in his own thoughts. It was only when I touched his arm that he roused himself with a violent start and stepped out of the carriage. They have a lot of aviation-related stuff in there. Well, because isn't there also, like, the NASA report? I realize, isn't that, like, a thing? Where if you make a mistake and you file a NASA report, it's for, like, education and stuff. So it's like, I know I did something wrong, but I'm aware of it, and I'm going to help better my own and others' aviation education by talking about it. And not a get out of jail free card, but like it's helpful for not, again, bringing like, I know I did something wrong, it was a mistake, and here's how we can better do stuff in the future. And yes, and again, like I know it goes like all together and stuff, but I don't know, it is an interesting thing. Excuse me, said he, turning to Colonel Ross, who had looked at him in some surprise. I was daydreaming. There was a gleam in his eyes and a suppressed excitement in his manner, which convinced me, used as I was to his ways, that his hand was upon a clue, though I could not imagine where he had found it. Perhaps you would prefer at once to go on to the scene of the crime, Mr. Holmes, said Gregory. I think that I should prefer to stay here a little and go into one or two questions of detail. Straker was brought back here, I presume. Yes, he lies upstairs. The inquest is tomorrow. He has been in your service some years, Colonel Ross. I have always found him an excellent servant. I presume that you made an inventory of what he had in his pockets at the time of his death, Inspector. I have the things themselves in the sitting room, if you would care to see them. You didn't see that in there? Okay, sounds good. Maybe that's not the best thing to put in there for a sort of what's the word? Presentational, thing. That's fair enough. Pockets, have the things, in the sitting room, care to see them? I should be very glad. We all filed into the front room and sat round the central table while the inspector unlocked a square tin box and laid a small heap of things before us. There was a box of Vestas, 2 inches of tallow candle, an ADP briar root pipe, a pouch of sealskin with half an ounce of long-cut Cavendish, a silver watch with a gold chain, 5 sovereigns in gold, an aluminum pencil case, a few papers, and an ivory-handled knife with a very delicate, inflexible blade marked Weiss & Co., London. This is a very singular knife, said Holmes, lifting it up and examining it minutely. I presume, as I see bloodstains upon it, that it is the one which was found in the dead man's grasp. Watson, this knife is surely in your line. It is what we call a cataract knife, said I. I thought so. A very delicate blade devised for very delicate work. A strange thing for a man to carry with him upon a rough expedition, especially as it would not shut in his pocket. Interesting. The tip was guarded by a disc of cork, which we found beside his body, said the inspector. His wife tells us that the knife had lain upon the dressing table, and that he had picked it up as he left the room. It was a poor weapon, but perhaps the best that he could lay his hands on at the moment. Oop. Very possible. How about these papers? 3 of them are receipted hay dealers' accounts. One of them is a letter of instructions from Colonel Ross. This other is a milliner's account for £37.15, made out by Madame Lesurier of Bond Street to William Derbyshire. Gersperbs. Mrs. Straker tells us that Derbyshire was a friend of her husband's and that occasionally his letters were addressed here. Madame Derbyshire, I have to say Derbyshire, sorry, had somewhat expensive tastes, remarked Holmes, glancing down the account. 22 guineas is rather heavy for a single costume. However, there appears to be nothing more to learn, and we may now go down to the scene of the crime. As we emerged from the sitting room, a woman who had been waiting in the passage took a step forward and laid her hand upon the inspector's sleeve. Her face was haggard and thin and eager, stamped with the print of a recent horror. "Have you got them? Have you found them?" she panted. "No, Mrs. Straker, but Mr. Holmes here has come from London to help us, and we shall do all that is possible." "Surely I met you in Plymouth at a garden party some little time ago, Mrs. Straker," said Holmes. "No, sir, you are mistaken." "Dear me, why I could have sworn to it. You wore a costume of dove-colored silk with ostrich feather trimming." "I never had such a dress, sir," answered the lady. "Ah, that quite settles it," said Holmes, and with an apology, he followed the inspector outside. A short walk across the moor took us to the hollow in which the body had been found. At the brink of it was the furze bush upon which the coat had been hung. Curious, curious. These are the best books of all time. I know. Hello, how's it going? Yes, I am. I'm very glad to get back to it. We read through the adventure up through the adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and now we're on the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. So yes, and the language is amazing, and the puzzles are amazing. So yes, agreed. There was no wind that night, I understand, said Holmes. None, but very heavy rain. In that case, the overcoat was not blown against the furze bush, but placed there. Yes, it was laid across the bush. You fill me with interest. I perceive that the ground has been trampled up a good deal. No doubt many feet have been here since Monday night. A piece of matting has been laid here at the side, and we have all stood upon that. Excellent. They're starting to learn. In this bag I have one of the boots which Straker wore, one of Fitzroy Simpson's shoes, and a cast horseshoe of silver blaze. My dear Inspector, you surpass yourself. Holmes took the bag, and descending into the hollow, he pushed the matting into a more central position. And it's awesome because it's not like he has not complained about it to a point where, yes, at some point he will learn. Then, stretching himself upon his face and leaning his chin upon his hands, he made a careful study of the trampled mud in front of him. "Hello," said he suddenly. "What's this?" It was a wax vesta, half burned, which was so coated with mud that it looked at first like a little chip of wood. "I cannot think how I came to overlook it," said the inspector, with an expression of annoyance. "It was invisible, buried in the mud. I only saw it because I was looking for it." "What? You expected to find it?" "I thought it not unlikely." He took the boots from the bag and compared the impressions of each of them with marks upon the ground. Then he clambered up to the rim of the hollow and crawled about among the ferns and bushes. "I am afraid that there are no more tracks," said the inspector. "I have examined the ground very carefully for 100 yards in each direction." "Indeed," said Holmes, rising. "I should not have the impertinence to do it again after what you say. But I should like to take a little walk over the moor before it grows dark, that I may know my ground tomorrow, and I think that I shall put this horseshoe into my pocket for luck." Yes, okay. Colonel Ross, who had shown some signs of impatience at my companion's quiet and systematic method of work, glanced at his watch. "I wish you would come back with me, Inspector," said he. "There are several points on which I should like your advice, and especially as to whether we do not owe it to the public to remove our horse's name from the entries for the cup." "Certainly not," cried Holmes with decision. "I should let the name stand." The colonel bowed. "I am very glad to have had your opinion, sir," said he. "You will find us at poor Straker's house when you have finished your walk, and we can drive together into Tavistock." Oops. He turned back with the inspector, while Holmes and I walked slowly across the moor. The sun was beginning to sink behind the stables of Mapleton, and the long, sloping plain in front of us was tinged with gold, deepening into rich, ruddy browns where the faded ferns and brambles caught the evening light. But the glories of the landscape were all wasted upon my companion, who was sunk in the deepest thought. "It's this way, Watson," said he at last. "We may leave the question of who killed John Straker for the instant, and confine ourselves to finding out what has become of the horse. Now, supposing that he broke away during or after the tragedy, where could he have gone to? The horse is a very gregarious creature. If left to himself, his instincts would have been either to return to King's Pyland or go over to Mapleton. Why should he run wild upon the moor? He would surely have been seen by now. And why should gypsies kidnap him? These people always clear out when they hear of trouble, for they do not wish to be pestered by the police. They could not hope to sell such a horse. They would run a great risk and gain nothing by taking him. Surely that is clear. Where is he then? I have already said that he must have gone to King's Pyland or to Mapleton. He is not at King's Pyland. Therefore, he is at Mapleton. Let us take that as a working hypothesis and see what it leads us to. This part of the moor, as the inspector remarked, is very hard and dry, but it falls away towards Mapleton, and you can see from here that there is a long hollow over yonder, which must have been very wet on Monday night. If our supposition is correct, then the horse must have crossed that, and there is the point where we should look for his tracks. We had been walking briskly during this conversation, and a few more minutes brought us to the hollow in question. At Holmes' request, I walked down the bank to the right, and he to the left, but I had not taken 50 paces before I heard him give a shout and saw him waving his hand to me. The track of a horse was plainly outlined in the soft earth in front of him, and the shoe which he took from his pocket exactly fitted the impression. "See the value of imagination," said Holmes. "It is the one quality which Gregory lacks. We imagined what might have happened, acted upon the supposition, and find ourselves justified. Let us proceed." We crossed the marshy bottom and passed over a quarter of a mile of dry, hard turf. Again the ground sloped, and again we came on the tracks. Then we lost them for half a mile, but only to pick them up once more quite close to Mapleton. It was Holmes who saw them first, and he stood pointing with a look of triumph upon his face. A man's track was visible beside the horse's. "The horse was alone before," I cried. "Quite so. It was alone before. Hullo, what is this?" The double track turned sharp off and took the direction of King's Pyland. Holmes whistled, and we both followed along after it. His eyes were on the trail, but I happened to look a little to one side, and saw to my surprise the same tracks coming back again in the opposite direction. "One for you, Watson," said Holmes when I pointed it out. "You have saved us a long walk, which would have brought us back on our own traces. Let us follow the return track." We had not to go far. It ended at the paving of asphalt which led up to the gates of the Mapleton stables. As we approached, a groom ran out from them. "We don't want any loiterers about here," said he. "I only wish to ask a question," said Holmes, with his finger and thumb in his waistcoat pocket. I only wish to ask a question," said Holmes, with his finger and thumb in his waistcoat pocket. "Should I be too early to see your master, Mr. Silas Brown, if I were to call at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning?" "Bless you, sir, if anyone is about, he will be, for he is always the first stirring. But here he is, sir, to answer your questions for himself. No, sir, no, it is as much as my place is worth to let him see me touch your money. Afterwards, if you like." As Sherlock Holmes replaced the half-crown which he had drawn from his pocket, a fierce-looking elderly man strode out from the gate with a hunting crop swinging in his hand. "What's this, Dawson?" he cried. "No gossiping. Go about your business. And you, what the devil do you want here?" 10 minutes' talk with you, my good sir," said Holmes in the sweetest of voices. "I've no time to talk to every gadabout. We want no stranger here. Be off, or you may find a dog at your heels." Holmes leaned forward and whispered something in the trainer's ear. He started violently and flushed to the temples. "It's a lie," he shouted. "An infernal lie." "Very good. Shall we argue about it here in public, or talk it over in your parlor?" "Oh, come in if you wish to." Holmes smiled. "I shall not keep you more than a few minutes, Watson," said he. "Now, Mr. Brown, I am quite at your disposal." It was 20 minutes, and the reds had all faded into grays before Holmes and the trainer reappeared. Never have I seen such a change as had been brought about in Silas Brown in that short time. His face was ashy pale, beads of perspiration shone upon his brow, and his hands shook until the hunting crop wagged like a branch in the wind. His bullying, overbearing manner was all gone too, and he cringed along at my companion's side like a dog with its master. "Your instructions will be done. It shall all be done," said he. "There must be no mistake," said Holmes, looking round at him. The other winced as he read the menace in his eyes. "Oh no, there shall be no mistake. It shall be there. Should I change it first or not?" Holmes thought a little, and then burst out laughing. "No, don't," said he. "I shall write to you about it. No tricks now, or, 'Oh, you can trust me, you can trust me.' Yes, I think I can. Well, you shall hear from me tomorrow." He turned upon his heel, disregarding the trembling hand which the other held out to him, and we set off for King's Pyland. A more perfect compound of the bully, coward, and sneak than Master Silas Brown I have seldom met with, remarked Holmes as we trudged along together. "He has the horse, then?" "He tried to bluster out of it, but I described to him so exactly what his actions had been upon that morning that he is convinced that I was watching him. Of course, you observe the peculiarly square toes in the impressions, and that his own boots exactly corresponded to them. Again, of course, no subordinate would have dared to do such a thing. I described to him how, when according to his custom he was the first down, he perceived a strange horse wandering over the moor, how he went out to it, and his astonishment at recognizing, from the white forehead which has given the favorite its name, that chance had put in his power the only horse which could beat the one upon which he had put his money. Then I described how his first impulse had been to lead him back to King's Pyland, and how the devil had shown him how he could hide the horse until the race was over, and how he had led it back and concealed it at Mapleton. When I told him every detail, he gave it up and thought only of saving his own skin. But his stables had been searched. Oh, an old horse fakir, like him, has many a dodge. But are you not afraid to leave the horse in his power now, since he has every interest in injuring it? My dear fellow, he will guard it as the apple of his eye. He knows that his only hope of mercy is to produce it safe. Colonel Ross did not impress me as a man who would be likely to show much mercy in any case. The matter does not rest with Colonel Ross. I follow my own methods and tell as much or as little as I choose. That is the advantage of being unofficial. I don't know whether you observed it, Watson, but the Colonel's manner has been just a trifle cavalier to me. I am inclined now to have a little amusement at his expense. Say nothing to him about the horse. Certainly not without your permission. And of course this is all quite a minor point compared to the question of who killed John Straker. And you will devote yourself to that. On the contrary, we both go back to London by the night train. I was thunderstruck by my friend's words. We had only been a few hours in Devonshire, and that he should give up an investigation which he had begun so brilliantly was quite incomprehensible to me. Not a word more could I draw from him until we were back at the trainer's house. The colonel and the inspector were awaiting us in the parlor. I am so ready for this. "My friend and I returned to town by the night express," said Holmes. "We have had a charming little breath of your beautiful Dartmoor air." The inspector opened his eyes, and the colonel's lip curled in a sneer. "So you despair of arresting the murderer of poor Straker," said he. Holmes shrugged his shoulders. "There are certainly grave difficulties in the way," said he. "I have every hope, however, that your horse will start upon Tuesday, and I beg that you will have your jockey in readiness. Might I ask for a photograph of Mr. John Straker?" The inspector took one from an envelope and handed it to him. "My dear Gregory, you anticipate all my wants. If I might ask you to wait here for an instant, I have a question which I should like to put to the maid." "I must say that I am rather disappointed in our London consultant," said Colonel Ross bluntly, as my friend left the room. "I do not see that we are any further than when he came." "At least you have his assurance that your horse will run," said I. "Yes, I have his assurance," said the colonel with a shrug of his shoulders. "I should prefer to have the horse." I was about to make some reply in defense of my friend when he entered the room again. "Now, gentlemen," said he, "I am quite ready for Tavistock." As we stepped into the carriage, one of the stable lads held the door open for us. A sudden idea seemed to occur to Holmes, for he leaned forward and touched the lad upon the sleeve. You have a few sheep in the paddock, he said. Who attends them? Who attends to them? I do, sir. Have you noticed anything amiss with them of late? Well, sir, not of much account, but 3 of them have gone lame, sir. I could see that Holmes was extremely pleased. That's not very nice. For he chuckled and rubbed his hands together. A long shot, Watson, a very long shot, said he, pinching my arm. Gregory, let me recommend to your attention this singular epidemic among the sheep. Drive on, coachman. Colonel Ross still wore an expression which showed the poor opinion which he had formed of my companion's ability, but I saw by the inspector's face that his attention had been keenly aroused. Also, an epidemic of sheep sounds like a good band name. You consider that to be important, he asked. Exceedingly so. Is there any point to which you would wish to draw my attention? To the curious incident of the dog in the night-time. The dog did nothing in the night-time. That was the curious incident, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Okay. 4 days later, Holmes and I were again in the train, bound for Winchester to see the race for the Wessex Cup. Colonel Ross met us by appointment outside the station, and we drove in his drag to the course beyond the town. His face was grave, and his manner was cold in the extreme. 1 second, I realized I'd forgotten something. There. Okay. There. Okay. Let me make sure. There. Good. Good. Okay, sorry. 4 days later, Holmes and I again on the train, Winchester, Colonel Ross, appointment, drove in his drag, face was grave, his manner was cold in the extreme. I have seen nothing of my horse, said he. I suppose that you would know him when you saw him, asked Holmes. The colonel was very angry. I have been on the turf for 20 years and never was asked such a question as that before, said he. A child would know Silver Blaze, with his white forehead and his mottled off foreleg. How is the betting? Well, that is the curious part of it. You could have got 15-1 yesterday, but the price has become shorter and shorter, until you can hardly get 3-1 now. Said Holmes. Somebody knows something, that is clear. As the drag drew up in the enclosure near the grandstand, I glanced at the card to see the entries. Wessex Plate, it ran, 50 sovereigns each foot, with 1,000 sovereigns added for 4 and 5-year-olds. Second, 300 pounds. Third, 200 pounds. New course, 1 mile and 5 furlongs. I don't understand any of this. Mr. Heath Newton's The Negro, red cap, cinnamon jacket. Colonel Wardlaw's pugilist, pink cap, blue and black jacket. Lord Backwater's Desborough, yellow cap and sleeves. Colonel Ross's Silver Blaze, black cap, red jacket. Duke of Balmoral's Iris, yellow and black stripes. Lord Singleford's Rasper, purple cap, black sleeves. New. We scratched our other one and put all hopes on your word, said the colonel. Why, what is that? Wait, we scratched our other one and put all our hopes on your word, said the colonel. Why, what is that? Silver Blaze, favorite. 5-4 against Silver Blaze, roared the ring. 5-4 against Silver Blaze. 5-15 against Desborough. 5-4 on the field. There are the numbers up, I cried. They are all 6 there. All 6 there? Then my horse is running, cried the colonel in great agitation. But I don't see him. My colors have not passed. Only 5 have passed. This must be he. As I spoke, a powerful bay horse swept out from the waiting enclosure and cantered past us, bearing on its back the well-known black and red of the colonel. That's not my horse, cried the owner. That beast has not a white hair upon its body. What is this that you have done, Mr. Holmes? Well, well, let us see how he gets on, said my friend imperturbably. For a few minutes he gazed through my field glass. Capital! An excellent start, he cried suddenly. There they are, coming round the curve. From our drag we had a superb view as they came up the straight. The 6 horses were so close together that a carpet could have covered them, but halfway up the yellow of the Mapleton stable showed to the... Hang on. The 6 horses were so close together that a carpet could have covered them, but halfway up the yellow of the Mapleton stable showed to the front. Before they reached us, however, Desborough's bolt was shot, and the colonel's horse, coming away with a rush, passed the post a good 6 lengths before its rival, the Duke of Balmoral's Iris, making a bad third. Oop. "It's my race anyhow," gasped the colonel, passing his hand over his eyes. "I confess that I can make neither head nor tail of it. Don't you think that you have kept up your mystery long enough, Mr. Holmes?" "Certainly, Colonel. You shall know everything. Let us all go round and have a look at the horse together. Here he is," he continued as we made our way into the weighing enclosure, where only owners and their friends find admittance. "You have only to wash his face and his leg in spirits of wine, and you will find that he is the same old Silver Blaze as ever. You take my breath away. I found him in the hands of a fakir, and took the liberty of running him just as he was sent over." "My dear sir, you have done wonders. The horse looks very fit and well. It never went better in its life. I owe you 1,000 apologies for having doubted your ability. You have done me a great service by recovering my horse. You would do me a greater still if you could lay your hands on the murderer of John Straker." "I have done so," said Holmes quietly. "What?" The colonel and I stared at him in amazement. "You have got him. Where is he, then?" "He is here." "Here? Where?" In my company at the present moment." The colonel flushed angrily. "I quite recognize that I am under obligations to you, Mr. Holmes," said he, "but I must regard what you have just said as either a very bad joke or an insult." Sherlock Holmes laughed. "I assure you that I have not associated you with the crime, Colonel," said he. "The real murderer is standing immediately behind you." He stepped past and laid his hand upon the glossy neck of the thoroughbred. "The horse!" cried both the colonel and myself. "Yes, the horse, and it may lessen his guilt if I say that it was done in self-defense, and that John Straker was a man who is entirely unworthy of your confidence. But there goes the bell, and as I stand to win a little on this next race, I shall defer a lengthy explanation until a more fitting time. Gosh darn it! Oh, that is quite the amazing horse. Bet if you give it a lick, it'll taste like raisins. Is that a reference that I don't understand? I'm hoping it is, because I'm unsure how I'm supposed to take that. We had the corner of a Pullman car to ourselves that evening as we whirled back to London, and I fancy that the journey was a short one to Colonel Ross as well as to myself, as we listened to our companion's narrative of the events which had occurred at the Dartmoor training stables upon the Monday night, and the means by which he had unraveled them. "Your internet boomerism is showing. Oh no, I'm sorry. I feel like I should know it, but I don't. Gosh darn it." "I don't know. I don't." "I confess," said he, "that any theories which I had formed from the newspaper reports were entirely erroneous, and yet there were indications there, had they not been overlaid by other details which concealed their true import." Oh, I've just had... Okay, sorry, I remembered a thing. I think he's going to get to it. "I went to Devonshire with the conviction that Fitzroy Simpson was the true culprit, although, of course, I saw that the evidence against him was by no means complete. It was while I was in the carriage, just as we reached the trainer's house, that the immense significance of the curried mutton occurred to me. You may remember that I was distraught, and remained sitting after you had all alighted. I was marveling in my own mind how I could possibly have overlooked so obvious a clue." I need to look this word up. Distrait. Oh, distray. Oh, there's no T. It's French. Distray. Distracted or absent-minded. He seemed oddly distray. It's very fancy. I like it. It's a good word. You may remember that I was distray. and remained sitting after you had all alighted. I was marveling in my own mind how I could possibly have overlooked so obvious a clue. I confess, said the colonel, that even now I cannot see how it helps us. It was the first link in my chain of reasoning. Powdered opium is by no means tasteless. The flavor is not disagreeable, but it is perceptible. Were it mixed with any ordinary dish, the eater would undoubtedly detect it, and would probably eat no more. A curry was exactly the medium which would disguise this taste. By no possible supposition could this stranger, Fitzroy Simpson, have caused curry to be served in the trainer's family that night, and it is surely too monstrous a coincidence to suppose that he happened to come along with powdered opium upon the very night when a dish happened to be served which would disguise the flavor. That is unthinkable. Therefore, Simpson becomes eliminated from the case, and our attention centers upon Straker and his wife, the only two people who could have chosen curried mutton for supper that night. The opium was added after the dish was set aside for the stable boy, for the others had the same for supper, with no ill effects. Which of them, then, had access to that dish without the maid seeing them? Before deciding that question, I had grasped the significance of the silence of the dog, for one true inference invariably suggests others. The Simpson incident had shown me that a dog was kept in the stables, and yet, though someone had been in and had fetched out a horse, he had not barked enough to arouse the two lads in the loft. Obviously, the midnight visitor was someone whom the dog knew well. I was already convinced, or almost convinced, that John Straker went down to the stables in the dead of the night, and took out Silver Blaze. For what purpose? For a dishonest one, obviously, or why should he drug his own stable boy? And yet I was at a loss to know why. There have been cases before now where trainers have made sure of great sums of money by laying against their own horses through agents and then preventing them from winning by fraud. Sometimes it is a pulling jockey, sometimes it is some surer and subtler means. What was it here? Sometimes it is a pulling jockey, sometimes it is some surer and subtler means. What was it here? I hoped that the contents of his pockets might help me to form a conclusion. And they did so. You cannot have forgotten the singular knife which was found in the dead man's hand, a knife which certainly no sane man would choose for a weapon. It was, as Dr. Watson told us, a form of knife which is used for the most delicate operations known in surgery, and it was to be used for a delicate operation that night. You must know, with your wide experience of turf matters, Colonel Ross, that it is possible to make a slight nick upon the tendons of a horse's ham, and to do it subcutaneously, so as to leave absolutely no trace. A horse so treated would develop a slight lameness, which would be put down to a strain in exercise or a touch of rheumatism, but never to foul play. "Villain! Scoundrel!" cried the colonel. We have here the explanation of why John Straker wished to take the horse out onto the moor. So spirited a creature would have certainly roused the soundest of sleepers when it felt the prick of the knife. It was absolutely necessary to do it in the open air. "I have been blind," cried the colonel. Of course that was why he needed the candle, and struck the match. Undoubtedly, but in examining his belongings, I was fortunate enough to discover not only the method of the crime, but even its motives. As a man of the world, Colonel, you know that men do not carry other people's bills about in their pockets. We have most of us quite enough to do to settle our own. I at once concluded that Straker was leading a double life and keeping a second establishment. The nature of the bill showed that there was a lady in the case, and one who had expensive tastes. Liberal as you are with your servants, one can hardly expect that they can buy 20-guinea walking dresses for their ladies. I questioned Mrs. Straker as to the dress, without her knowing it, and having satisfied myself that it had never reached her, I made a note of the milliner's address, and felt that by calling there with Straker's photograph, I could easily dispose of the mythical Derbyshire. From that time on, all was plain. And then we gotta switch quick. Hang on, where is it? There, okay. Sorry. Oop. From that time on, all was plain. Straker had led out the horse to a hollow where his light would be invisible. Simpson, in his flight, had dropped his cravat, and Straker had picked it up with some idea, perhaps, that he might use it in securing the horse's leg. Once in the hollow, he had got behind the horse and had struck a light, but the creature, frightened at the sudden glare, and with the strange instinct of animals feeling that some mischief was intended, had lashed out, and the steel shoe had struck Straker full on the forehead. He had already, in spite of the rain, taken off his overcoat in order to do his delicate task, and so, as he fell, his knife gashed his thigh. Do I make it clear? Oops, oh gosh. Oh, there it is, okay. Do I make it clear? Wonderful, cried the colonel. Wonderful. You might have been there. My final shot was, I confess, a very long one. It struck me that so astute a man as Straker would not undertake this delicate tendon-nicking without a little practice. What could he practice on? My eyes fell upon the sheep, and I asked a question which, rather to my surprise, showed that my surmise was correct. You have made it perfectly clear, Mr. Holmes. When I returned to London, I called upon the milliner, who at once recognized Straker as an excellent customer of the name of Derbyshire, who had a very dashing wife with a strong partiality for expensive dresses. I have no doubt that this woman had plunged him over head and ears in debt, and so led him into this miserable plot. You have explained all but one thing, cried the colonel. Where was the horse? Ah, it bolted and was cared for by one of your neighbors. We must have an amnesty in that direction, I think. This is Clapham Junction, if I am not mistaken, and we shall be in Victoria in less than 10 minutes. If you care to smoke a cigar in our rooms, Colonel, I shall be happy to give you any other details which might interest you. Silver Blaze. It's such a happy story. It's one of the, at the beginning, it did. It was kind of like, darn, there's a murder. Sad. Did not deserve this. Well, he did, so it works. And horse does the thing, wins the thing, avenges, pre-avenges. I like that, pre-avenges. And yeah, that was good. That was a nice happy story. Without quite being a happy story. But yeah, so good. So good. And the language and the puzzling. Yeah. Yeah, and I did. I wanted to have the picture in there because it's a horse and it's pretty. A horse is a horse, of course. The reason why old time radio is a classic for you. Yes. Hello, by the way. How's it going? So good. I'm so happy. I'm so happy to be doing this again. And it's yep, we will. We're going to do one more. Oops, I have to put the thing up again. Oops, that's not right. We have one more. The stockbroker's clerk. It goes. You recovered from Osh. Okay, that's good. Ready for next year? Good. I am glad. It is. It is Thursday, isn't it? Yes. Whew. It has. It's been almost a week, and it seems weird that it's been almost a week. Time flies. So that was Silver Blaze in the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. And now, that was number 1. And now we are on to The Stockbroker's Clerk. Dun, dun, dun. The Stockbroker's Clerk. Shortly after my marriage, I had bought a connection in the Paddington district. Old Mr. Farquhar, old Mr. Farquhar, from whom I purchased it, had at one time an excellent general practice, but his age and an affliction of the nature of St. Vitus's dance, from which he suffered, had very much thinned it. The public not unnaturally goes on the principle that he who would heal others must himself be whole, and looks askance at the curative powers of the man whose own case is beyond the reach of his drugs. Thus, as my predecessor weakened, his practice declined, until, when I purchased it from him, it had sunk from 1,200 to little more than 300 a year. I had confidence, however, in my own youth and energy, and was convinced that in a very few years the concern would be as flourishing as ever. For 3 months after taking over the practice, I was kept very closely at work, and saw little of my friend Sherlock Holmes, for I was too busy to visit Baker Street, and he seldom went anywhere himself, save upon professional business. I was surprised, therefore, when one morning in June, as I sat reading the British Medical Journal after breakfast, I heard a ring at the bell, followed by the high, somewhat strident tones of my old companion's voice. "Ah, my dear Watson," said he. "My dear Watson," said he, striding into the room. I am very delighted to see you. I trust that Mrs. Watson has entirely recovered from all the little excitements connected with our adventure of the Sign of 4. "Thank you, we are both very well," said I, shaking him warmly by the hand. "And I hope, also," he continued, sitting down in the rocking chair, "that the cares of medical practice have not entirely obliterated the interest which you used to take in our little deductive problems." "On the contrary," I answered, "it was only last night that I was looking over my old notes and classifying some of our past results." "I trust that you don't consider your collection closed." "Not at all. I should wish nothing better than to have some more of such experiences." "Today, for example?" "Yes, today, if you like." "And as far off as Birmingham?" "Certainly, if you wish it." "And the practice?" "I do my neighbor's when he goes. He is always ready to work off the debt." "Ha! Nothing could be better," said Holmes, leaning back in his chair and looking keenly at me from under his half-closed lids. "I perceive that you have been unwell lately. Summer colds are always a little trying." "I was confined to the house by a severe chill for 3 days last week. I thought, however, that I had cast off every trace of it." "So you have. You look remarkably robust." "How, then, did you know of it?" "My dear fellow, you know my methods." "You deduced it, then?" "Certainly." "And from what?" "From your slippers." I glanced down at the new patent leathers, which I was wearing. "How on earth—" I began, but Holmes answered my question before it was asked. "Your slippers are new," he said. "You could not have had them more than a few weeks. The soles which you are at this moment presenting to me are slightly scorched. For a moment I thought they might have got wet and been burned in the drying, but near the instep there is a small circular wafer of paper with the shopman's hieroglyphics upon it. Damp would of course have removed this. You had then been sitting with your feet. He's sitting with everyone's feet out. Sorry, you had then been sitting with your feet outstretched to the fire, which a man would hardly do even in so wet a June as this if he were in his full health." Like all Holmes's reasoning, the thing seemed simplicity itself when it was once explained. He read the thought upon my features, and his smile had a tinge of bitterness. God dang it. Is that how it sounded? It didn't sound that way in my head. My bad. Don't take that out of context. His smile had a tinge of bitterness. And now I am also bitter. "I am afraid that I rather give myself away when I explain," said he. "Results without causes are much more impressive. You are ready to come to Birmingham, then?" "Certainly. What is the case?" "You shall hear it all in the train. My client is outside in a four-wheeler. Can you come at once?" "In an instant." I scribbled a note to my neighbor, rushed upstairs to explain the matter to my wife, and joined Holmes upon the doorstep. "Quick, Watson, the needle!" "You're not going to stop thinking about that one for a while." I know. God dang it. Ugh. And hey, the needle is better than him grabbing the gun. Or is it? And if that's a reference I don't understand, I'm sorry. Thank you for the follow. Okay, I'm sorry if I mispronounce it. Maya Arch. I appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Certainly, what is the case? Four-wheeler, can you come? Doorstep. Your neighbor is a doctor, said he, nodding at the brass plate. Yes, he bought a practice as I did. An old established one, just the same as mine. Both have been ever since the houses were built. You're here to listen to my voice. Oh no! You quite like it. Oh, no. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. I haven't always been fond of my voice, so I'm yes. Push through that. Now we're doing this, so I'm glad that it can be of entertainment to you. Ah, then you got hold of the best of the two. I think I did. But how do you know? By the steps, my boy. Yours are worn 3 inches deeper than his. But this gentleman in the cab is my client, Mr. Hall Pycroft. Allow me to introduce you to him. Whip your horse up, cabby, for we have only just time to catch our train. The man whom I found myself facing was a well-built, fresh-complexioned young fellow with a frank, honest face and a slight, crisp yellow mustache. He wore a very shiny top hat and a neat suit of sober black, which made him look what he was, a smart young city man of the class who have been labeled cockneys, but who give us our crack volunteer regiments and who turn out more fine athletes and sportsmen than any body of men. Oh my God, sorry. Than any body of men in these islands. His round, ruddy face was naturally full of cheeriness, but the corners of his mouth seemed to me to be pulled down in a half-comical distress. It was not, however, until we were all in a first-class carriage and well started upon our journey to Birmingham that I was able to learn what the trouble was which had driven him to Sherlock Holmes. Oops. We have a clear run here of 70 minutes, Holmes remarked. I want you, Mr. Hall Pycroft, to tell my friend your very interesting experience exactly as you have told it to me, or with more detail if possible. It will be of use to me to hear the succession of events again. It is a case, Watson, which may prove to have something in it, or may prove to have nothing, but which, at least, presents those unusual and outre features which are as dear to you as they are to me. Now, Mr. Pycroft, I shall not interrupt you again. I like the different ways that that Doyle brings out the stories. Like, oh, I've already heard it, so you tell it to Watson, I'm going to listen again. Instead of just Watson telling it, or Sherlock telling it, or the person telling it. It's good. It's nice. Or person telling it to both of them at the same time. It's good. Our young companion looked at me with a twinkle in his eye. The worst of the story is, said he, that I show myself up as such a confounded fool. Of course it may work out all right, and I don't see that I could have done otherwise, but if I have lost my crib and get nothing in exchange, I shall feel what a soft Johnny I have been. I'm not very good at telling a story, Dr. Watson, but it is like this with me. I used to have a billet at Coxon-on-Woodhouses of Draper's Gardens, but they were let in early in the spring, through the Venezuelan loan, as no doubt you remember, and came a nasty cropper. Okay. Sorry, so it's in sort of like a cadence and a voice that's kind of throwing me off. But we'll try. I had been with them 5 years, and old Coxon gave me a ripping good testimonial when the smash came, but of course we clerks were all turned adrift, the 27 of us. I tried here and tried there, but there were lots of other chaps on the same lay as myself, and it was a perfect frost for a long time. I had been taking £3 a week at Coxon's, and I had saved about 70 of them, but I soon worked my way through that and out at the other end. I was fairly at the end of my tether at last, and could hardly find the stamps to answer the advertisements, or the envelopes to stick them to. I had worn out my boots paddling up office stairs, and I seemed just as far from getting a billet as ever. At last I saw a vacancy at Mawson and Williams's, the great stockbroking firm in Lombard Street. I dare say E.C. is not much in your line, but I can tell you that this is about the richest house in London. The advertisement was to be answered by letter only. I sent in my testimonial and application, but without the least hope of getting it. Back came an answer by return, saying that if I would appear next Monday, I might take over my new duties at once, provided that my appearance was satisfactory. No one knows how these things are worked. Some people say that the manager just plunges his hand into the heap and takes the first that comes. Anyhow, it was my innings that time, and I don't ever wish to feel better pleased. The screw was £1 a week rise, and the duties just about the same as at Coxon's. And now I come to the queer part of the business. I was in diggings out Hampstead way, 17 Potter's Terrace, or 17 I guess I could say, 17 Potter's Terrace. Well, I was sitting doing a smoke that very evening, after I had been promised the appointment, when up came my landlady with a card which had Arthur Pinner, financial agent, printed upon it. I had never heard the name before and could not imagine what he wanted with me, but of course I asked her to show him up. In he walked, a middle-sized, dark-haired, dark-eyed, black-bearded man with a touch of the sheeny about his nose. He had a brisk kind of way with him and spoke sharply like a man who knew the value of time. Story time! Oh, yes! We are hearing the story. Hello, by the way. How's it going? We are currently listening to the account of the strangeness of I assume the stockbroker's clerk. This is the stockbroker's clerk, an adventure or memoir of Sherlock Holmes. And the stockbroker's clerk, I think, is telling us his story, kind of. It's confusing, kind of. Hidey-ho there, hidey-ho. I like it. Touch of sheeny about his nose. Brisk kind of way with him, and spoke sharply like a man who knew the value of time. Mr. Hall Pycroft, I believe, said he. Yes, sir, I answered, pushing a chair towards him. Lately engaged at Coxon and Woodhouse's? Yes, sir. And now on the staff of Mawson's? Quite so. Well, said he, the fact is that I have heard some really extraordinary stories about your financial ability. You remember Parker, who used to be Coxon's manager? He can never say enough about it. Of course, I was pleased to hear this. I had always been pretty sharp in the office, but I had never dreamed that I was talked about in the city in this fashion. You have a good memory? Said he. Pretty fair, I answered modestly. Have you kept in touch with the market while you have been out of work? He asked. Yes, I read the stock exchange list every morning. Now that shows real application, he cried. That is the way to prosper. You won't mind my testing you, will you? Let me see. How are Ayrshires? 106 1/4 to 105 7/8. And New Zealand Consolidated? 104. And British Broken Hills? 7 to 7 6. Wonderful, he cried, with his hands up. This quite fits in with all that I had heard. My boy, you are very much too good to be a clerk at Mawson's. This outburst rather astonished me, as you can think. Well, said I, other people don't think quite so much of me as you seem to do, Mr. Pinner. I had a hard enough fight to get this berth, and I am very glad to have it. Pooh, man, you should soar above it. You are not in your true sphere. Now, I'll tell you how it stands with me. What I have to offer is little enough when measured by your ability, but when compared with Mawson's, it's light to dark. Let me see. When do you go to Mawson's? On Monday. Ha ha! I think I would risk a little sporting flutter that you don't go there at all. Not go to Mawson's? No, sir. By that day, you will be the business manager of the Franco-Midland Hardware Company Limited, with 134 branches in the towns and villages of France, not counting one in Brussels and one in San Remo. What a pitch! This took my breath away. I never heard of it, said I. Very likely not. It has been kept very quiet, for the capital was all privately subscribed, and it's too good a thing to let the public into. That's what it is. My brother, Harry Pinner, is promoter and joins the board after allotment as managing director. He knew I was in the swim down here and asked me to pick up a good man cheap. A young, pushing man with plenty of snap about him. Parker spoke of you, and that brought me here tonight. We can only offer a beggarly 500 to start with. $500 a year, I shouted. Only that at the beginning, but you are to have an overriding commission of 1% on all business done by your agents, and you may take my word for it that this will come to more than your salary. But I know nothing about hardware. My boy, you know about figures. My head buzzed, and I could hardly sit still in my chair. But suddenly, a little chill of doubt came upon me. I must be frank with you, said I. Mawson only gives me 200, but Mawson is safe. Now, really, I know so little about your company that— Ah, smart, smart, he cried, in a kind of ecstasy of delight. You are the very man for us. You are not to be talked over, and quite right, too. Now, here's a note for £100, and if you think that we can do business, you may just slip it into your pocket as an advance upon your salary. That is very handsome, said I. When should I take over my new duties? Heidi-ho, how's it going? How's it going? I hope well. We are reading Sherlock Holmes. And yes, we are on to a new mystery. I am thinking it's not going to have to do with gruesomeness, although that is yet to be seen. We shall see. Be in Birmingham tomorrow at 1, said he. I have a note in my pocket here which you will take to my brother. You will find him at 126B Corporation Street, where the temporary offices of the company are situated. Of course, he must confirm your engagement, but between ourselves, it will be all right. Really, I hardly know how to express my gratitude, Mr. Pinner, said I. Not at all, my boy. You have only got your deserts. There are 1 or 2 small things, mere formalities, which I must arrange with you. You have a bit of paper beside you there. Kindly write upon it, I am perfectly willing to act as business manager to the Franco Midland Hardware Company Limited at a minimum salary of £500. I did as he asked, and he put the paper in his pocket. There is one other detail, said he. What do you intend to do about Mawson's? I had forgotten all about Mawson's in my joy. I'll write and resign, said I. Oh, you're just starting the chapter of holds. Okay, any advice on how to learn how to correctly predict what hold is appropriate? I will send you a thing. If I forget, remind me. I loved practicing holds, and there is an app sort of a thing that you can do. So once you get down how you're gonna do it. Oh, and I have the platyduck. What was it? Sarah. The platypus. Perry the holdapus. I'll show you. So yes, definitely. I shall help. Funny mention that you just downloaded a few thousand pages of aviation reading material to your tablet. Nice. Like what? Is that part of the stuff you're going to send to me? Or is that different? Excellent. Yay. Okay, sorry. I loved doing holds. It's a lot of fun to draw them out and figure it out. So yes. Okay. Precisely what I don't want you to do. I had a row over you with Mawson's manager. I had gone up to ask him about you, and he was very offensive, accused me of coaxing you away from the service of the firm, and that sort of thing. At last, I fairly lost my temper. If you want good men, you should pay them a good price, said I. He would rather have our small price than your big one, said he. I'll lay you a $5, said I, that when he has— What is happening? Hang on. I'm getting confused. Yes, it's always in these when there's an offer that's too good to be true. There's a reason, but we'll find out. Okay, so this is between this Pinner and Mawson's manager. At last, I fairly lost my temper. If you want good men, you should pay them a good price, said I. He would rather have our small price than your big one, said he. I'll lay you a $5, said I, that when he has my offer, you'll never so much as hear from him again. Done, said he. We picked him out of the gutter, and he won't leave us so easily. Those were his very words. The impudent scoundrel, I cried. I've never so much as seen him in my life. Why should I consider him in any way? I shall certainly not write if you would rather I didn't. Good, that's a promise, said he, rising from his chair. Well, I'm delighted to have got so good a man for my brother. Here's your advance of £100, and here is the letter. Make a note of the address, 126B Corporation Street, and remember that 1 o'clock tomorrow is your appointment. Good night, and may you have all the fortune that you deserve. Oops. That's just about all that passed between us, as near as I can remember. You can imagine, Dr. Watson, how pleased I was at such an extraordinary bit of good fortune. I sat up half the night hugging myself over it, and next day I was off to Birmingham in a train that would take me in plenty time for my appointment. I took my things to a hotel in New Street, and then I made my way to the address which had been given me. Another thing you were going to send is unrelated to aviation. Ooh, okay, sounds good. So curious. You're lurking back to online ground school. Sounds good. I will try not to be too, too distracting, but also no promises. You're going to crash. Sounds good. Getting close to midnight. Oh no. Okay, sounds good. Sleep well. It was good to see you. And yeah, all the good things. Hope you have a good Friday and then a good weekend. It is. It's almost the weekend, isn't it? So yes, very good to see you. Look forward to it again. And yeah, all the good things. It was a quarter of an hour before my time, but I thought that would make no difference. 126B was a passage between two large shops, which led to a winding stone stair, from which there were many flats, let as offices to companies or professional men. The names of the occupants were painted at the bottom on the wall, but there was no such name as the Franco Midland Hardware Company, Limited. I stood for a few minutes with my heart in my boots, wondering whether the whole thing was an elaborate hoax or not, when up came a man and addressed me. He was very like the— oh, sorry, I'm supposed to be doing the voice. He was very like the chap I had seen the night before, the same figure and voice, but he was clean-shaven, and his hair was lighter. "Are you Mr. Hall Pycroft?" he asked. "Yes," said I. I have a thought, and I hope I'm right. "Oh, I was expecting you, but you are a trifle before your time. I had a note from my brother this morning in which he sang your praises very loudly. I was just looking for the offices when you came. We have not got our name up yet, for we only secured these temporary premises last week. Come up with me, and we will talk the matter over." I followed him to the top of a very lofty stair, and there, right under the slates, were a couple of empty, dusty little rooms, uncarpeted and uncurtained, into which he led me. I had thought of a great office with shining tables and rows of clerks, such as I was used to, and I dare say I stared rather straight at the two deal chairs and one little table which, with a ledger and a waste paper basket, made up the whole furniture. "Don't be disheartened, Mr. Pycroft," said my new acquaintance, seeing the length of my face. "Rome was not built in a day, and we have lots of money at our backs, though we don't cut much dash yet in offices. Pray sit down and let me have your letter." I gave it to him, and he read it. I gave it to him, and he read it over very carefully. "You seem to have made a vast impression upon my brother, Arthur," said he, "and I know that he is a pretty shrewd judge. He swears by London, you know, and I by Birmingham, but this time I shall follow his advice. Pray consider yourself definitely engaged." "What are my duties?" I asked. "You will eventually manage the great depot in Paris, which will pour a flood of English crockery into the shops of 134 agents in France. The purchase will be completed in a week, and meanwhile you will remain in Birmingham and make yourself useful." "How?" For answer, he took a big red book out of a drawer. "This is a directory of Paris," said he, "with the trades after the names of the people. I want you to take it home with you, and to mark off all the hardware sellers with their addresses." I'm sorry. Mike is bothering me. "This is a directory of Paris," said he, "with the trades after the names of the people. I want you to take it home with you, and to mark off all the hardware sellers with their addresses. It would be of the greatest use to me to have them." "Surely there are classified lists," I suggested. "Not reliable ones. Their system is different from ours. Stick at it, and let me have the lists by Monday at 12. Good day, Mr. Pycroft. If you continue to show zeal and intelligence, you will find the company a good master." We shall see. Okay. Is that right there? There, perfect. Okay. I went back to the hotel with the big book under my arm, and with very conflicting feelings in my breast. On the one hand, I was definitely engaged and had £100 in my pocket. On the other, the look of the offices, the absence of name on the wall, and other of the points which would strike a businessman had left a bad impression as to the position of my employers. However, come what might, I had my money, so I settled down to my task. All Sunday I was kept hard at work, and yet by Monday I had only got as far as H. I went round to my employer, found him in the same dismantled kind of room, and was told to keep at it until Wednesday, and then come again. On Wednesday it was still unfinished, so I hammered away until Friday, that is, yesterday. Then I brought it round to Mr. Harry Pinner. "Thank you very much," said he. "I fear that I underrated the difficulty of the task. This list will be of very material assistance to me." "It took some time," said I. "And now," said he, "I want you to make a list of the furniture shops, for they all sell crockery." "Very good. And you can come up tomorrow evening at 7 and let me know how you are getting on. Don't overwork yourself. A couple of hours at Day's Music Hall in the evening would do you no harm after your labors." He laughed as he spoke, and I saw with a thrill that his second tooth upon the left-hand side had been very badly stuffed with gold. Sherlock Holmes rubbed his hands with delight, and I stared with astonishment at our client. "You may well look surprised, Dr. Watson, but it is this way," said he. "When I was speaking to the other chap in London, at the time that he laughed at my not going to Mawson's, I happened to notice that his tooth was stuffed in this very identical fashion. The glint of the gold in each case caught my eye, you see. When I put that, with the voice and figure being the same, and only those things altered which might be changed by a razor or a wig, I could not doubt that it was the same man. Of course, you expect two brothers to be alike, but not that they should have the same tooth stuffed in the same way." He bowed me out, and I found myself in the street, hardly knowing whether I was on my head or my heels. Back I went to my hotel, put my head in a basin of cold water, and tried to think it out. Why had he sent me from London to Birmingham? Why had he got there before me? And why had he written a letter from himself to himself? It was altogether too much for me, and I could make no sense of it. And then suddenly it struck me that what was dark to me might be very light to Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I had just time to get up to town by the night train to see him this morning, and to bring you both back with me to Birmingham. There was a pause after the stockbroker's clerk had concluded his surprising experience. Then Sherlock Holmes cocked his eye at me, leaning back on the cushions with a pleased and yet critical face, like a connoisseur who has just taken his first sip of a comet vintage. "Rather fine, Watson, is it not?" said he. "There are points in it which please me. I think that you will agree with me that an interview with Mr. Arthur Harry Pinner in the temporary offices of the Franco Midland Hardware Company, Limited, would be a rather interesting experience for both of us." "But how can we do it?" I asked. "Oh, easily enough," said Hall Pycroft cheerily. "You are two friends of mine who are in want of a billet, and what could be more natural than that I should bring you both round to the managing director?" "Quite so, of course," said Holmes. "I should like to have a look at the gentleman, and see if I can make anything of his little game. What qualities have you, my friend, which would make your services so valuable? Or is it possible that—" He began biting his nails and staring blankly out of the window, and we hardly drew another word from him until we were in New Street. At 7 o'clock that evening, we were walking, the three of us, down Corporation Street to the company's offices. "It is no use our being at all before our time," said our client. "He only comes there to see me, apparently, for the place is deserted up to the very hour he names." "That is suggestive," remarked Holmes. "By Jove, I told you so!" cried the clerk. "That's he walking ahead of us there." He pointed to a smallish, dark, well-dressed man who was bustling along the other side of the road. As we watched him, he looked across at a boy who was bawling out the latest edition of the evening paper and running over among the cabs and buses. He bought one from him. Then, clutching it in his hand, he vanished through a doorway. "There he goes!" cried Hall Pycroft. "These are the company's offices into which he has gone. Come with me, and I'll fix it up as easily as possible." Following his lead, we ascended 5 stories until we found ourselves outside a half-opened door at which our client tapped. A voice within bade us enter, and we entered a bare, unfurnished room such as Hall Pycroft had described. At the single table sat the man whom we had seen in the street, with his evening paper spread out in front of him, and as he looked up at us, it seemed to me that I had never looked upon a face which bore such marks of grief, and of something beyond grief, of a horror such as comes to few men in a lifetime. His brow glistened with perspiration, his cheeks were of the dull, dead white of a fish's belly, and his eyes were wild and staring. He looked at his clerk as though he failed to recognize him, and I could see by the astonishment depicted upon our conductor's face that this was by no means the usual appearance of his employer. "Hi! How's it going? How are you? I hope well. It's good to see you. We are currently reading today." And yes, I was quite look of horror. His cheeks like a dull, dead white of a fish's belly. Sounds pretty horrible. So yes, I don't know. I was thinking it was going to be sort of a more, or I should say less horrific. But here we go. It is getting into it. But yes, hope you're well. Good to see you. Not the usual appearance. "You look ill, Mr. Pinner," he exclaimed. "Yes, I am not very well," answered the other, making obvious efforts to pull himself together and licking his dry lips before he spoke. "Who are these gentlemen whom you have brought with you?" "One is Mr. Harris of Bermondsey, and the other is Mr. Price of this town," said our clerk glibly. Glibly? Glibly. "They are friends of mine and gentlemen of experience, but they have been out of a place for some little time, and they hope that perhaps you might find an opening for them in the company's employment." Very possibly, cried Mr. Pinner with a ghastly smile. "Yes, I have no doubt that we shall be able to do something for you. What is your particular line, Mr. Harris?" "I am an accountant," said Holmes. "Ah, yes, we shall want something of the sort. And you, Mr. Price?" "A clerk," said I. "I have every hope that the company may accommodate you. I will let you know about it as soon as we come to any conclusion. And now I beg that you will go. For God's sake, leave me to myself." These last words were shot out of him, as though the constraint which he was evidently setting upon himself had suddenly and utterly burst asunder. Holmes and I glanced at each other, and Hall Pycroft took a step towards the table. "You forget, Mr. Pinner, that I am here by appointment to receive some directions from you," said he. "Certainly, Mr. Pycroft, certainly," the other resumed in a calmer tone. "You may wait here a moment, and there is no reason why your friends should not wait with you. I will be entirely at your service in 3 minutes, if I might trespass upon your patience so far." He rose with a very courteous air, and, bowing to us, he passed out through a door at the farther end of the room, which he closed behind him. "What now?" whispered Holmes. "Is he giving us the slip?" "Impossible," answered Pycroft. "Why so?" "That door leads into an inner room." "There is no exit?" "None." "Is it furnished?" "It was empty yesterday." "Then what on earth can he be doing? There is something which I don't understand in his manner. If ever a man was 3 parts mad with terror, that man's name is Pinner. What can have put the shivers on him?" "He suspects that we are detectives?" I suggested. "That's it!" cried Pycroft. Holmes shook his head. "He did not turn pale. He was pale when we entered the room," said he. "It is just possible that—" His words were interrupted by a sharp rat-tat from the direction of the inner door. "What the deuce is he knocking at his own door for?" cried the clerk. Again and much louder came. Again and much louder came the rat-tat-tat. We all gazed expectantly at the closed door. Glancing at Holmes, I saw his face turn rigid, and he leaned forward in intense excitement. Then suddenly came a low guggling. I don't think that's a low gargling sound, and a brisk drumming upon woodwork. Holmes sprang frantically across the room and pushed at the door. It was fastened on the inner side. Following his example, we threw ourselves upon it with all our weight. One hinge snapped, then the other, and down came the door with a crash. Rushing over it, we found ourselves in the inner room. It was empty. But it was only for a moment that we were at fault. At one corner, the corner nearest the room which we had left, there was a second door. Holmes sprang to it and pulled it open. A coat and waistcoat were lying on the floor, and from a hook behind the door, with his own braces round his neck, was hanging the managing director of the Franco Midland Hardware Company. So much for less gruesome. His knees were drawn up, his head hung at a dreadful angle to his body, and the clatter of his heels against the door made the noise which had broken in upon our conversation. In an instant I had caught him round the waist and held him up while Holmes and Pycroft untied the elastic bands which had disappeared between the livid creases of skin. Then we carried him into the other room, where he lay with a clay-colored face, puffing his purple lips in and out with every breath, a dreadful wreck of all that he had been but 5 minutes before. "What do you think of him, Watson?" asked Holmes. I stooped over him and examined him. His pulse was feeble and intermittent, but his breathing grew longer, and there was a little shivering of his eyelids, which showed a thin white slit of ball beneath. "It has been touch and go with him," said I, "but he'll live now. Just open the window and hand me the water carafe." I undid his collar, poured the cold water over his face, and raised and sank his arms until he drew a long, natural breath. "It's only a question of time now," said I, as I turned away from him. Holmes stood by the table, with his hands deep in his trousers pockets, and his chin upon his breast. "I suppose we ought to call the police in now," said he, "and yet I confess that I'd like to give them a complete case when they come." "It's a blessed mystery to me," cried Pycroft, scratching his head. "Whatever they wanted to bring me all the way up here for, and then... Pooh, I guess. Pooh, all that is clear enough," said Holmes impatiently. "It is this last sudden move. You understand the rest, then?" "I think that it is fairly obvious. What do you say, Watson?" I shrugged my shoulders. "I must confess that I am out of my depths," said I. "Oh, surely if you consider the events at first, they can only point to one conclusion." "What do you make of them?" "Well, the whole thing hinges upon 2 points. The first is the making of Pycroft write a declaration by which he entered the service of this preposterous company. Do you not see how very suggestive that is?" "I am afraid I missed the point." "Well, why did they want him to do it? Not as a business matter, for these arrangements are usually verbal, and there was no earthly business reason why this should be an exception. Don't you see, my young friend, that they were very anxious to obtain a specimen of your handwriting, and had no other way of doing it?" "And why? Yes, why? Quite so. Why? When we answer that, we have made some progress with our little problem. Why? There can be only one adequate reason. Someone wanted to learn to imitate your writing, and and had to procure a specimen of it first. Okay. I think I have a thought. And now, if we pass on to the second point, we find that each throws light upon the other. That point is the request made by Pinner that you should not resign your place, but should leave the manager of this important business in the full expectation that a Mr. Hall Pycroft, whom he had never seen, was about to enter the office upon the Monday morning. "My God!" cried our client. "What a blind beetle I have been!" Now you see the point about the handwriting. Suppose that someone turned up in your place who wrote a completely different hand from that in which you had applied for the vacancy. Of course, the game would have been up, but in the interval the rogue had learned to imitate you, and his position was therefore secure, as I presume that nobody in the office had ever set eyes upon you. "Not a soul," groaned Hall Pycroft. "Very good. Of course it was of the utmost importance to prevent you from thinking better of it, and also to keep you from coming into contact with anyone who might tell you that your double was at work in Mawson's office. Therefore they gave you a handsome advance on your salary, and ran you off to the Midlands, where they gave you enough work to do to prevent your going to London, where you might have burst their little game up. That is all plain enough. But why should this man pretend to be his own brother?" Well, that is pretty clear also. There are evidently only two of them in it. The other is the other is impersonating you at the office. This one acted as your engager and then found that he could not find you an employer without admitting a third person into his plot. That he was most unwilling to do. He changed his appearance as far as he could and trusted that the likeness, which you could not fail to observe, would be put down to a family resemblance. But for the happy chance of the gold stuffing, your suspicions would probably never have been aroused. Hall Pycroft shook his clenched hands in the air. Good Lord, he cried. Well, I have been fooled in this way. What has this other Hall Pycroft been doing at Mawson's? What should we do, Mr. Holmes? Tell me what to do. We must wire to Mawson's. They shut at 12 on Saturdays. Never mind, there may be some doorkeeper or attendant. Ah, yes, they keep a permanent guard there on account of the value of the securities that they hold. I remember hearing it talked of in the city. Very good. We shall wire to him and see if all is well, and if a clerk of your name is working there, that is clear enough. But what is not so clear is why at sight of us, one of the rogues should instantly walk out of the room and hang himself. The paper, croaked a voice behind us. The man was sitting up, blanched and ghastly, with returning reason in his eyes, and hands which rubbed nervously at the broad red band which still encircled his throat. The paper, of course, cried Holmes, in a paroxysm of excitement. Idiot that I was! I thought so much of our visit. I feel like that's supposed to be much. I thought so much of our visit that the paper never entered my head for an instant. To be sure, the secret must be there. He flattened it out upon the table, and a cry of triumph burst from his lips. Look at this, Watson, he cried. It is a London paper, an early edition of the Evening Standard. Here is what we want. Look at the headlines. Crime in the city. Murder at Mawson and Williams's. Gigantic attempted robbery. Capture of the criminal. Here, Watson, we are all equally anxious to hear it, so kindly read it aloud to us. It appeared from its position in the paper to have been the one event of importance in town, and the account of it ran in this way. A desperate attempt at robbery, culminating in the death of one man and the capture of the criminal, occurred this afternoon in the city. For some time back, Mawson and Williams, the famous financial house, have been the guardians of securities which amount in the aggregate to a sum of considerably over £1,000,000 sterling. So conscious was the manager of the responsibility which devolved upon him in consequence of the great interests at stake that safes of the very latest construction have been employed, and an armed watchman has been left day and night in the building. It appears that last week a new clerk named Hall Pycroft was engaged by the firm. This person appears to have been none other than Beddington, the famous forger and cracksman, who, with his brother, had only recently emerged from a 5 years' spell of penal servitude. By some means which are not yet clear, he succeeded in winning, under a false name, this official position in the office, which he utilized in order to obtain molding of various locks and a thorough knowledge of the position of the strong room and the safes. It is customary at Mawson's for the clerks to leave at midday on Saturday. Sergeant Tucson of the city police was somewhat surprised, therefore, to see a gentleman with a carpet bag come down the steps at 20 minutes past 1. His suspicions being aroused, the sergeant followed the man, and with the aid of Constable Pollack, succeeded, after a most desperate resistance, in arresting him. It was at once clear that a daring and gigantic robbery had been committed. Nearly £100,000 worth of American railway bonds, with a large amount of scrip in mines and other companies, was discovered in the bag. On examining the premises, the body of the unfortunate watchman was found doubled up and thrust into the largest of the safes, where it would not have been discovered until Monday morning, had it not been for the prompt action of Sergeant Tucson. The man's skull had been shattered by a blow from a poker delivered from behind. There could be no doubt that Beddington had obtained entrance by pretending that he had left something behind him. and having murdered the watchman, rapidly rifled the large safe and then made off with his booty. His brother, who usually works with him, has not appeared in this job as far as can at present be ascertained, although the police are making energetic inquiries as to his whereabouts. Well, we may save the police some little trouble in that direction, said Holmes, glancing at the haggard figure huddled up by the window. Human nature is a strange mixture, Watson. You see that even a villain and murderer can inspire such affection that his brother turns to suicide when he learns that his neck is forfeited. However, we have no choice as to our action. The doctor and I will remain on guard, Mr. Pycroft, if you will have the kindness to step out for the police. Oh my god! That did not. See, and again. So the first one, again, I like every time we read these, the two that we end up reading, well, when they're short enough, the two that we end up reading seem to be somehow connected, but also contrasting. So, like the first one, right? Like robbery of a horse as well as murder ends up happily and great. And then this one, where it seems like, ooh, haha, game sort of a thing, goes in the completely opposite direction. So, I'm just like, and I'll say too, that there have been a couple that kind of started out sort of the same way, where it's like, yeah, like, gets a job under strange circumstances, and something happens, but still, again, never disappoints. Amazing. Excellent. Yeah. Ugh. That was good. That was so good. I enjoyed that very much. Again, I mean, like, that one ended terribly, obviously. But yeah, just such good writing, such good storytelling, and they do, again, started out somewhat same story, but was able to go in such a different direction and tell it in like a different way, because it didn't quite get to the police at all. It was just the paper, and you just, as a reader, imagine what's going to end up happening. So yeah, just all the different tools of the trade that get used that make each story so unique. Again, even with that skeleton of sameness. Skeleton of Sameness. Sounds like a good band name, too. I was also... Was it Guggling? Guggling. I think it was Guggling. I wanted to look up that word. I wanted to see if it was actually a word. I feel like it was... Oh, it was probably supposed to be gurgling? Man. Yes, there. Thinking better of it. Less mystery to me. All clear enough. Guggling. Yes, guggling. That is why the new Holmes stories are great out of C or SEA on classic radio. Yes? Okay, when you say new Holmes stories, like ones written by people other than Doyle recently? Or like the newest Doyle story? I don't know. I don't keep up with new stuff, if that's the thing. But awesome. Okay. Guggling. It's probably oh, sorry. Guggling. Guggling. To drink, making a gurgling sound. To make a sound like that made when liquid is poured from a bottle. Guggling. I like that word now. Where is it? And okay, and honestly, that this entire paragraph, this entire scene, I will say, was just because it started out like, ooh, we're gonna find stuff out and it's gonna be fun and interesting, and then it does, and then it goes to bore such marks of grief, something beyond grief, of horror, and then it switches to that description. His cheeks were of the dull dead white of a fish's belly, eyes wild and staring, and it just kind of throws you off after the whole sort of comical beginning. And then it's just, oh, okay, he's gonna kind of step out. He's gonna be whatever and can't get out. What's he gonna do? And then yeah, then it's rat tat from the direction of the inner door. Why is he knocking at his own door? It's funny. And then this entire paragraph just throws it at you. So good. Yeah, that's what writing's supposed to be. It's not just telling you a story, it's making you feel that story. Both adaptations and new stuff. Excellent. Okay. I may have to look into that. Could you post it potentially? If it's possible to listen to it somehow, I'll put it. If anyone wants, Discord, yay! Because I would. So I do. I'm very happy being back on the reading of the fiction. I was gonna start reading some more fiction on my own, but now I but I'm going to start reading after the book that I'm finishing now. I'm gonna start reading Stick and Rudder, which should have read anyway, but I have a lot of questions that my instructor was like, have you read Stick and Rudder? And I'm like, no, but I've been meaning to. And he's like, read it. All of these answers are in that book. So I'm like, okay. So I'm gonna finish the book I'm reading now, and then I'll be reading that. So this is my fiction for the moment, and I'm hoping to keep at it weekly. So yeah, because oh god, it's so good, needed. Oh, thank you, excellent. I'm gonna like so, there. Thank you. So yeah, that would be a different medium than because I'm not. I usually don't do sort of like audiobook sort of things, which is weird because like I'm not making them, but yeah, it's a slightly different medium. But I like reading, like the reading out of the books. But that would be interesting. So you're back. Excellent. We finished. So wait, when did you leave? Because I can summarize if you'd like. Otherwise, you'll have to read it on your own, which I can send a link if you would like. Stick and Rudder is a classic, a must read. I know, and that's why I had it on my phone to read since my private pilot training, and I never got to it. So I will. I will get it, and I will do it, and it'll be good. And speaking of, okay, so I guess I can throw that out there then. Since we are finished, again, freaking amazing. It's just so good. I forgot how much I love these. Anyway, so I did do a little bit of flying, and it was not what I was expecting. We planned to have a lesson. I finished my lesson plan for Principles of Flight. But I did not get a chance to like re-practice it over again. If you want, one second, here. Oh shoot! Wait, this way. Oops, you can't see the whole thing, but that is my masterpiece. I found out I like drawing things to illustrate things because it makes it feel more active than just pointing at pictures and stuff. And like using a model can be somewhat limiting, I feel like. So yeah, so started doing the whiteboard, went through the whole Principles of Flight and drew that all out. So that's that. Got snagged on a couple of things. Talked to instructor about one of them. And then we'll talk about the other stuff once we actually get a lesson, because again, was going to have a lesson. He had a flight in the Baron that he had to go do, so it was either he was going to cancel on me or I got to go with. So I got to go with, and that we almost thought we were going to not be able to go because of potential weather, but it ended up working out fine. We're experience in um, weather and weather decision making process thing again, and the the guy who's the guy who we are, yeah, flying in the plane, one of the owners, he doesn't like flying, but he likes the convenience. So it was a little bumpy today. So we were flying up at 10,000, kind of scooting around some stuff. It was gorgeous. Saw my first standing lenticular clouds, which was really freaking cool. Um, and yeah, and it was good. So yeah, so the Baron's multi-engine. I don't have the experience yet. This is the second time I've been in that plane, but we're working on it. And it was a good time. And we'll work on actual lessons next week. So I have some more time to practice it some more and get it really down. So it'll be good. I'm kind of excited. So yeah, you can read it on your own. Sounds good. You forget when you left, but you had to let the dog out, which is absolutely, like, that is very important. So I hope Pepper is good. Did Pepper go poop? I'm sorry, that sounded weird, but it's funny because it sounds the same, but like different. Because I'm sorry, I like word things. If you couldn't tell. Oh, what is the thing? Oh, excellent. Okay, nice. Well, and that is like kind of not where it started, but yeah, there were a lot of good things that came out of radio, and it's such a good medium too. And I've always thought voice work would be interesting, but never like got into it. So yeah, very cool. Thank you. Yes, he did. Excellent. Off topic. Do I have everything explained for the professional pilot? I don't, because I'm cheap. But I have I have heard good things about, like, really good things about it, but then I've heard like other things, like it doesn't quite, something about how it doesn't explain things quite. I can't remember what it was, but it was something about how it wasn't explaining things quite sufficiently or something. But I will look in I will look into it again. Sounds good. Okay. You can say it was his number 2 walk of the day, but excellent. Awesome. Oh, I love it. Pun-tastic. It has been an evening of puns. If I have a good base, it is a great reference. Okay, that sounds fair. Okay. All right. I will look into it. I will look into it again. We shall see. Oh, I guess I can hang on. Where is this? What is this? Going like this. Going like this. Oops, but I also need, hang on. Ma-da-da-da. Oh, and that one is what? Oops. Excellent. Sounds good. I'm so cheap though. We'll see. Not really meant as a training manual, more reference. Okay. Which, and that's the thing, because I don't know. I have everything on ForeFlight now. You know what I mean? So I don't know. We'll see. I'll look into it a bit more. I'll see if it's something. I'll see if it's something that'll work for me. But I appreciate it a lot, and I'm definitely looking forward to Stick and Rudder. But again, that's why we need to continue doing the Sherlock Holmes, because I need fiction, and I'm not getting that in my everyday life now. So yeah. Yeah. So that was the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, but it was the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, Silver Blaze and the Stockbroker's Clerk. So good. The language, the voice, the voices, and that is another one of the things is it's so interesting to me as like a semi writer. I don't I attempt to write, but the voice that comes through the writing is just insane. And from what? It literally is it's the same words, but it's arranged just so. Yeah. It can be put on an iPad. Right, right, but it's like everything else can be put on an iPad too. So like I don't know. Like if you have all the encyclopedias in the world on a thing, why would you need a dictionary? Kind of. That's a really bad analogy, but I'm going with it. So, yeah. Yeah. Aerodynamics for Naval Aviator is good too, but techie, okay. I mean, it could you find the Holmes voice if you did not know Rathbone? I'm not sure. That sounds like something that I should understand, but I don't. I do, but it's not quite there in my mind at the moment. I don't know. No, but but that's the thing. The writing itself brings out the voice, whether or not each reader hears the same thing, if that makes sense. So yeah, so it's like it's just like with imagery where the description can be just so precise, right? Um, but people will still visualize things that could be completely different. Just like with a voice, it can be just so, but it can come through differently to different people. Basil Rathbone was in the movie Holmes. Okay, or was the movie Holmes. So, I think we have talked about this at one point. I think somebody posted it in my Discord. And I can't remember if we were going to try to watch them after Holmes, or wait, that might have been, yeah, we were gonna, there was something about that. I would like to finish these first, and then I am so like excited to watch the movies and stuff, and really need to listen to old time radio characters. Yes, I do. I've gotten a little bit more into like vocal, like more interested, I should say, in the vocal work. Just because it is, I love voices and accents and stuff. I just think it just adds so much flavor to presentation. So yeah, that sounds great, and I love the old timey stuff as well. So yeah, that'd be good. I will. I'll look into it. I have not had time beyond the usuals, but I am. I'm gonna try and make time because I do need it. So yeah, that was awesome. I missed this, but I do want to keep going with it. So that was Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, Silver Blaze, Stockbroker's Clerk. Usually on, yes. So that's what we've done on Thursdays. Usually is reading, and we're hopefully gonna stick with that. So Sundays we usually do games, but we're gonna leave that day open for now until I can get back into a proper schedule. So we'll be flying again on Tuesday, barring changes. Again, I'll update on the Discord. And then Thursday, hopefully, we will once again do the Sherlock Holmes. So yeah, that is the plan. Um, and yeah, should listen to Johnny Dollar, the detective with the action-packed expense account. That sounds awesome. YouTube has a whole bunch of radio classic. That does definitely send them to me. Post them in the Discord. I will definitely. Ooh, that could be a cool thing. I don't usually like listen to things, but I think that would be something that I could definitely do. Yeah, definitely send those to me. Awesome. Yeah. If there's somewhere that you guys would like to go, let me know. Otherwise, I usually don't raid on these days just because I don't like know what's all around and with like these things can I don't know, like the reading of things can go different ways. So I just usually head to bed. So good stuff to fall asleep to. Ooh, that sounds nice. I might have to try that. Okay, sounds good. So yeah, with that said, I will be heading to bed. I hope you guys had a good time. I know this is different than for newer people to the channel than the stuff that I usually do, namely flying. But yeah, this is books and stories were what like my first love, and it's what I started the streaming with, and I love doing it, and the classics are just my favorite. So I appreciate you guys uh, appreciating it as well, and letting me indulge that, and yeah, having a good time too. So yeah. So to whoever got lost and found their way here or found their way back, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. Um, if I've forgotten anything, my brain is mush as usual. I did not mean to. I apologize. Forgiveness, please. Um, and yeah, I hope you are well. I hope I hope you stay well, and I hope you have a great Friday and a great weekend, and in general a great whatever it's going to be for you, day or night. Hope to see you again soon. And until next time, wishing you all the good things. So thank you so much, and